Assalamu alaikum, welcome to this video. We're going to be discussing an interesting perspective on consciousness. Now, Hamza, one of the things you said to me before we started this is, now you know why I was focusing on this topic all these years, right? So, what I wanted to do with these videos is make short clips people can understand this perspective, because longer clips, you have a particular podcast which I'll put in the description, in which you go over this over, I think, about 2 hours. This is quite with Bassam, is it?
Yes.
Bassam Zawadi. So that was really, really good.
From blogging theology.
Yeah, blogging theology. It's an excellent talk. So the first thing I want to say is Robert Lawrence Kuhn. He is a giant in the field because of his giant paper, The Landscape of Consciousness, and he went over many different perspectives. And one of the things that, when we were having the conversation, that came up is that he doesn't shy away from theological or spiritual interpretations of this. So I highlighted to him your perspective, the integrative dualistic.
Yeah, dualism.
Dualism, right? So in a nutshell, what is that?
Well, it's not my perspective. I took it from the likes of Professor Charles Taliaferro, and I think maybe others. Now, the question is, why are we required to have such a perspective, or why is it intellectually leading us down that road? Is because I would argue, and many people argue as well, that physicalism is not a correct approach to understanding the hard problem of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And the hard problem is based on two key questions. People think it's only one. You have the epistemic question, which is the epistemic gap, that we don't know what it's like for an individual organism, conscious organism, to have a specific inner subjective conscious experience. Yeah, how do you bridge that gap? And physicalism kind of fails, right? For example, if you were to map out everything in your brain, you're having a coffee right now that I made you, which is rare, by the way. So if I were to map out all the neurochemical firings in your brain and correlate it to you having a coffee,
Mm-hmm.
and then you say to me, oh, it's warm, it's sweet, it's got tones of berry, and tones of chocolate, tones of this, that, and the other, we still don't know what it's like for you to have that particular experience.
Yeah.
Because we're just correlating neurochemical firings to an event, to your linguistic utterances, but those utterances are meanings that are vehicles to meaning, and meaning is a representation of that subjectivity, but we don't know what that subjectivity is, what it's like to be in that state. What is it like for Sabor to have that coffee that he describes as, with tones of chocolate and berry and so on and so forth? Yeah.
So
that's the epistemic gap.
So in a summary, it's like a brain scan is not equal to the mental state. You cannot derive from this everything, and then
from an epistemic perspective. So we can know everything about your brain, everything, all the nuances, right? All the madness, all the neurochemical firings correlating to your experiences, correlating to your linguistic utterances, describing those experiences. It does not in any way give us epistemic access to knowing what it's like for Sabul to be in that particular conscious experience, in a subjective conscious experience. Now, one would argue, well, I have similar descriptions, and the neurochemical firings are exactly the same as Sabul's, so therefore I now know. No, you don't, because although you may have the similar neurochemical firings and you're having the similar linguistic utterances that describing your experience, we still don't know what it's still like for you to have that particular experience in a way that you have described, in the way your brain has mapped, even though it may look like Sabul's, because it's an experience we don't know. It's very internal, and that's why you can't access the first person through the third person, if you like, and the scientific neuroscientific paradigm is kind of third person reality, but this is the first person fact, if you want to call it. So that's the first part of the problem. The second part is what you call an ontological problem, the source and nature of reality. So what we would say is that how is it the case that you have inner subjective conscious experience arising from seemingly blind, cold, non-conscious physical processes? Yeah. And that is a big question. How, it's like you have a stone and you rub the stone for a few moments, all of a sudden you have these butterflies coming out. Yeah. How do you explain that? There is no logical link. There is no physical link between the butterflies and the stone, if you like. So similarly, if we believe in this physicalist world, that we are just electrons whizzing around, really, you know, all these electrons coming together, we're just carbon. How, and it's cold, non-conscious, how can we explain that you have inner subjective conscious experiences arising from these seemingly cold, blind, non-conscious physical processes? And that is a big question, because they're fundamentally different. You know, the from a metaphysical perspective is different. It's like saying, you know, I don't know, it's even very, very hard to even put into words, but our intuitions are philosophical or rational.
What is like is the way that they usually summarize it, that thinking like a bat, like what is it like to be this particular thing?
But it's not just that. Yeah, it is for sure. Or I'm having internal subjective experiences right now, and we believe they're true. So assuming that we don't believe in this kind of illusionism or whatever you call it, or Mysterianism, we believe that this is a first person fact, that I'm having inner subjective conscious experiences. How does that experience or these experiences arise from seemingly cold, blind, non-conscious physical stuff?
Okay, good.
That's the ontological. So these are the two.
Good,
these are two.
Good.
So what we would say is, or what many people say is, physicalism and therefore neuroscience, because neuroscience has physicalist assumptions, right?
So what I want to do is
they fail to address the hard problem.
Yeah. So I wanted to cover physicalism and its inability to address this particular issue in a separate video. Here, what I want to jump to...
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it out there.
I wanted to jump to is, why is the integrative dualism a solution? And importantly, I know you said it's not your view, but you did develop it from an Islamic perspective. That's why I felt like in that video. So from an Islamic perspective, why does it dovetail with our theology, this particular perspective? And is this also another question I wanted to add on, ask is, science is inductive, and that we will always discover more. Is this a view that can be revised, or is this if you like, a categorical view that we can subscribe to?
Okay, yeah, well, I'll answer your last question now first. I think, we need to discuss this. These are new realities in a way. We need to take the Quran and Sunnah, take the classical methodology and apply it to these kind of new-ish realities, because the whole idea of neuroscience and physicalism and, all of these discussions, the hard problem of consciousness, generally speaking, is relatively new, although some of the ideas can be traced way back. But because neuroscience is a relatively new domain of knowledge of science, then so it is up for grabs in terms of, ulama, students of knowledge, need to sit together with subject matter experts, understand what Allah says. Some of these things, there may be space for differences of opinion, there may be a space for further discussion. So I'm not saying this is the only view, So integrative dualism. What is integrative dualism? So integrative dualism is basically saying that let's do all the science. No problem. We continue the neuroscientific explorations and investigations. We accept everything.
So it's not a science stopper?
No, of course not. Just take it. Do what you want. Yeah. What we're saying is, stop where the science stops. Meaning, don't make false metaphysical conclusions, which are non-scientific, really.
Yeah.
Don't make false metaphysical conclusions as a result of your neuroscientific investigations. Yeah. Also, realize that neuroscience is based upon certain philosophical assumptions, which they can't really necessarily prove, which is physicalism. We're not going to discuss why physicalism fails. That's another video. But bring that assumption to today's table. Physicalism fails, therefore neuroscience fails to address the hard problem of consciousness. Therefore, neuroscience can't really deal with the hard problem of consciousness. But it deals with so many amazing things concerning consciousness. So we accept all of that, and we just say stop where the neuroscience stops. Because neuroscience cannot deal with the hard problem of consciousness because physicalism fails. And what we say is, well, let dualism answer those metaphysical questions. So it's integrative. So you integrate the neuroscientific explorations and studies, and you have a metaphysical backdrop which says, continue doing the science, but stop where the science stops. And where science can't address these big metaphysical questions, allow dualism to address it, because neuroscience is not equipped as a domain of knowledge to even address physicalism.
Okay,
So that's
good.
what it is. So I give you a quote from Professor Charles Taliaferro. It's quite nice. He says, "I do not see why the brain sciences cannot continue with its study of psychophysical interaction. Moreover, one may be a dualist and treat consciousness and brain states, the person and body, as functional units without supposing that there is only one kind of thing metaphysically that is in play. Mind-body, or as I prefer to call it, integrative dualism, is a thesis in metaphysics. Integrative dualism is not a scientific hypothesis that competes with any scientific claims." Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how does that now fit a kind of Islamic theistic paradigm?
Yeah, that's the one.
Well, basically, you know, well, generally speaking, we take the view that, you know, consciousness, or if you like, the ruh, but that assumes that there's a link between consciousness and the ruh, which is the soul, but that's another discussion. But we take that this is not physical. It doesn't mean it's not real stuff. It means it's not of this world, right? That Allah created, you know, the spirit, created the ruh and put it into, you know, Adam alayhi salam, and so on and so forth. So there is a non-physical aspect to our reality, and therefore we would say that integrative dualism supports that view, right? Because at the end of the day, we're not saying it's just physical stuff. We didn't emerge from like blind, cold, you know, carbon or physical processes. So that's one thing to address, yeah? So it addresses that. So, yeah, and we believe that the source and nature of reality is not just blind physical stuff. We believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth. And we say, Laysa kamithlihi shay, there is nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, as Ibn Taymiyyah said, that the creation is distinct and disjoined from the creator. Allah is transcendent. So from that perspective, it supports the kind of thesis that we believe in the unseen. We believe in the non-physical, as I just described what that means. So integrative dualism, so that would make sense of the theistic paradigm.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And just to end upon.
Does that make sense?
No, no.
I mean, question me further. I don't want to get too complicated.
No, absolutely. And I wanted to keep these videos short and go over, because there's loads of segues into other things, right? Allah says in the Quran that about the soul we've been given very little knowledge.
Yes.
However, we are also told that it is something from outside of this world, so that we do know.
Yeah, so this is not questioning the kind of the realities of the soul that we don't know, that we cannot really access because only Allah knows it, right? This is affirming what Allah has implied in that
Ontologically,
ontologically, that the soul exists, and the soul is not blind physical stuff based on blind physical stuff, right? That you have a soul or consciousness that is not of this world, if you like. It came from Allah. Allah created it within us, right? And so this is important, because people think, oh, why are you talking about the soul? Allah says, you know, you've only been given little knowledge. Agreed. But we're not talking about those realities. We're talking about the realities that Allah has given to us in terms of knowledge, implicitly or explicitly, which it exists, and you cannot just describe it in a blind physical way, right?
Absolutely.
That's the point. And you can't just say the soul doesn't exist or consciousness doesn't exist, just an illusion. So we're just affirming what Allah has already affirmed.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for that. So for anybody who wants more information about this, I'm going to put a link to the video, and also a link to a landscape of consciousness, which has a section on Islam, by the way. So he's done a great job here, and he goes over some of these nuanced points, but obviously not in a lot of detail because the paper is huge. So check that out below. Jazakallah khair for watching. Assalamu alaikum.